Okay, folks, back again with part two of composition. So this is what we're talking about. Let's do a quick review of composition. So the the important elements of composition, right, are unity, balance, movement, rhythm, okay, focus, contrast, and proportion. Which we often talk about as perspective. So in part one, we talked about unity, right? Unity and a little bit of variety, right, are what help, all of these are what help create the visual interest. And the visual interest is what we want in our photographs. And you know what? Anyone can learn this, you guys. This is not something that you're just necessarily born with, although some people have more of an eye for it than others. This is all learnable. So we talked about unity, right? The components that unify your photograph. Balance, asymmetrical, right? We talked about asymmetrical. We talked about movement, using lines especially as elements. We talked about rhythm. Rhythm is often created when we're using repetition of shapes, right? So repetition, focus, right? That your subject is in sharp focus. Contrast, light against dark and dark against light, and proportion, or we're going to talk about it as perspective, okay? Because that's one of the ways that we can show 3 dimensions in a 2-dimensional work. And so with perspective, and this is something that you may have already heard about if you've taken art classes, but with perspective, we're able to create a 3-dimensional illusion, right? A 3-dimensional illusion in a 2-dimensional space, right? Our photographs are 2-dimensional. Right, they're flat. All we have is the space in the format, right? The format's the size. So I can't stick my hand through it, right? It's flat. I can't do anything else. So I have to be able to create an illusion of 3 dimensions. One of the ways we do that in photography is with light. Remember we talked about the different aspects of the different types of light, like direction light. Shows really good 3 dimensions, right? Because it shows the light and the shadow help to describe 3 dimensions in a 2-dimensional space, but so does perspective, right? And there's basically 3 types of perspective, right? And this is so that perspective helps us to describe 3 dimensions in a 2-dimensional space. Right? That's all it is. We're helping us to describe in our photograph, because photographs are 2-dimensional, right? We can't see them. It's flat. We can't reach into it. We only have the height and the width of the photograph. So we must, in order to define depth in our photographs, we have to give it a 3-dimensional illusion. We have to promote that illusion. And there's 3 types of perspective, right? Here, let me write that in so that you can see it. 3 types of perspective. The first is with line. It's called linear perspective. Right? So linear perspective is, and I'll show them to you, but first we'll start off with linear perspective, and then the second one is called intellectual perspective. Right? And the third one is called atmospheric. Atmospheric perspective. So we'll start off with linear perspective, okay? So linear perspective is using line, right? That's what we're talking about here. So starting off with this, linear perspective uses line, okay? And there's three types of linear perspective, right? There's 1 point, 2 point, and 3 point perspective. So let's see what that means. So with perspective, we need a horizon line with linear perspective. So we'll just put a horizon line in here. We'll put it up high so you can see. So 1 point perspective has things vanishing to 1 point. So if I were to do that, we'd look at it at, say, a road, and you look down the road and you see that as you get further down, it vanishes up, it vanishes into the horizon at 1 point. What? 1 point perspective, right? And things tend to look smaller. So if I had some trees, as I'm going down, they'd get smaller and smaller till they all kind of blend together, right? 1 point perspective is a little, you can describe 3 dimensions in it, but it's not always as easy. So let's see, we'll use this color. So if I have 1 point perspective and I'm looking at, say, a box, right? It might look something like this. Right? I might see a box that looks kind of looking off into the horizon. But if I was looking at a different angle, I may not be able to even see the top of it. And how would I know? If I was looking at it straight on, right, and I didn't have that perspective, I wouldn't know if it was just a flat piece of cardboard or if it was a cube. So having that 1 point perspective, right, can help me to describe 3 dimensions in a 2-dimensional space. 2 point perspective, you have 2 vanishing points on your horizon, and they could be anywhere on the horizon. I'm just gonna, and you'll notice that like artists will often draw these radiating lines from this out into the picture plane. And when I'm describing 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions in this 2-dimensional space, I can use these lines as guidelines on how to show that there's 3 dimensions there. So in this case, I might, if I was going to say we have that box, right? Or maybe I have a building. I use the lines to describe the building, right? And then here on 1 point, I can only see 2 sides of the thing. Here, I see 3 sides, right? So I can see 3 sides, and I've described a 3-dimensional object in a 2-dimensional space, and you can see it there, right? You can see it has 3 dimensions. It looks like 3-dimensional. If I put shadow in, it would even look more 3-dimensional, right? So if I had like, you know, a shadow on the side there, it might even look even more 3-dimensional. 3-point perspective is rarely used, but I want to tell you about it so you understand why certain things turn out the way they do when you're taking a photograph. Now, 3-point perspective, you could have the 3rd point be up high or down low, and there's technical terms for this. I'm not going to get into that. You can look them up. If you look up 3-point perspective on the internet, you'll see some really cool artworks that use that, right? So 3-point perspective, you have 2 points, right, once again on the horizon line, but then you have a 3rd point that you're dealing with, and depending on either it's a bird's eye view or a worm's eye view, is what you're drawing with 3-point or doing a photograph with 3-point perspective. So here you might have these radiating lines coming out, right, from the 2-point perspective. But then you might also have from the 3rd point down here, or from the 3rd point up above, if you're doing it from up above, you might also have these radiating lines coming from a 3rd point, right? That's our 3-point. So in this case, if I was doing, this would be a bird's eye view, say, of a building, right? You would see it looking like this, right? You would get this perspective if you were looking down from a tall height, right? You'd look down, and the building would appear to be smaller on the bottom than it is on the top, right? Well, the same would be true if you were doing it the other way. So we have if the 3rd point was up here, right, we would have the radiating lines coming this way. And then the 3rd point would come like that. Now this would what you would get if you were doing what we call a worm's eye view, right? If you were laying on the ground looking up at a building, you would notice that the bottom of the building would seem larger, right, than the top of the building. So you would notice that the building would seem to get smaller as it goes up. Right? So you might see it looking something like that, right? Or even like this. So you got something going up. Yeah. So that's 3-point perspective. So you're using 3 points, either the 3rd point's down low or up high. Right? So you can see how different they can look. Right? So that's linear perspective, 1, 2, and 3-point of linear perspective. Now the second one is called intellectual perspective. That's linear. Intellectual perspective works a little differently, and just like we're talking in intellectual, it is talking about our brains. So intellectual perspective works more like this. So let's say we have 3 objects. Which one is closest? Which one is closest to us? Well, you're probably going to say the circle, right? Which one is furthest away? You're probably going to say the square. And what's in the middle? The triangle. Right. So, is it really closer or further away? No, it's flat. They're all the same distance. But our intellect, our brain, tells us from experience, right? We've had a lifetime of experience. No matter how old you are, you've had a lifetime of experience, right? It's your lifetime. Our brain tells us, our intellect tells us from all this experience that when things are overlapping, right, the one that you see, the whole part is going to be the closest, and the object that it's overlapping is going to be further away, and then the next one would even be further away, right? Because our brain tells us you can't overlap something unless it's behind the other thing. Makes sense, right? So that's our brain telling us that. And then our brain might also tell us, there's some other intellectual perspectives, and these can help you in photography as well, right? That sometimes it can be placement on the picture plane, right? So it could be just where they're placed on the picture plane. Now in this case, which one is further away? Well, in general, we tend to say this one is, because the higher up it is, the further away it is, right? Our brain tells us that usually when we're looking at something, the higher up it is on our composition, right, the further away it is. So they would say this is closer, this is next, and then that's the furthest away, right? That's intellectual perspective, because our brains are telling us something that's not really true, but we know about it from experience, right? And then another way that is proportion, right? So proportion would say the large object is closer, right? And the small object is further away, because as things get further away, they appear smaller to us, right? Are they really smaller? No. But as they get further away, they appear smaller. So that is intellectual perspective, where our brain tells us, because of experience in our lifetime, where things will be in our composition according to whether they're overlapping, their level on the picture plane, high or low, and the size, right? So the size could, is also known as proportion, right? Right, you can do that illusion of making someone look really small by closing one eye and holding your hand out. And you could have like a car or a person like on your hand and make it look like it's a little tiny thing on your hand, right? You can do the same thing with your camera. You can make an illusion of something being far away, or something far away being actually close up and in your hand, just by doing something like that. It's actually pretty fun. So that's the second type of perspective, is intellectual, okay? And the third type is atmospheric. So atmospheric is kind of fun because it has to do with our atmosphere. And we talked about that one way. We talked about light, right? We were talking about the colors, the light color, the spectrum of light, the visible spectrum being, on this huge line or whatever of electromagnetic energy. We can only see this one little portion, this little skinny portion of visible light, right? That's the visible electromagnetic energy on the spectrum, the full spectrum that goes from radio and TV waves up to gamma rays, right? Low frequency to high frequency, right? Long waves, short waves. Got it? Right. So pretty interesting stuff. So this is really fun. So atmospheric perspective basically says that if something's really far away, it's going to appear faded, right? Because you're looking through all that atmosphere, and it's also going to appear bluish or purplish, right? So it's far away, it's going to appear faded, and it's going to appear bluish or purplish. Right, so bluish or purplish is atmospheric perspective. And we talked about it because if there's the earth, right, and there's the atmosphere above it, right, and I'm standing over here, and there's big old mountains over here, and I'm looking through a whole lot of atmosphere, right, like twice the amount of atmosphere. It's not only going to appear faded because it's far away and I can't see it that well, right, but it's going to appear bluish or purplish because of the blueness in the atmosphere. That's the ultraviolet light that is refracted by the gases in our atmosphere, and it bounces all over in those gases. And so when we look up, it appears the sky is blue, right? And it appears that way because of all this refracted ultraviolet light. And that is also what interferes with our eyesight when we look at something further away and it appears this color. That's atmospheric perspective. And we can actually fool people to make it look like something's really far away and it's not, by going into, say, Photoshop and giving it that appearance, or like painting it. Like back in the day, if you wanted to make it look like there was big mountains or rocks, you could actually paint them. They could be small, and you could paint them to look like that faded thing, and it would make it look like there were big mountains back in the background, even if they were just little tiny rocks that you would paint it and set in your composition. So that is a little trick that you could use. Kind of fun, right? So those are the three types of perspective: linear, intellectual, and atmospheric. And they all help us to describe 3 dimensions in a 2-dimensional space, right? And so let's go back for just a sec, and we'll talk just a little bit more about good composition, because you can learn how to use your camera like we talked about, using your camera is like riding a bike. Once you learn how to use it, all those technical skills, they become second nature, just like driving a car. Once you've learned it, you've learned all those rules, you've learned how to work that machine correctly, then it becomes second nature. You don't have to think about it all the time. You don't have to think. It's automatic that you just turn on the turn indicator when you're going to turn, right? We know how it works. Well, once you've got used to using your camera, it's going to be the same way. You're going to have that, you're going to have those skills just in your brain, and you won't have to think about it so much. Then you can pay more attention to your composition. So far in this class, we've done mostly working on our technical skills, right? But now we have to work on our artistic skills, and the composition is the artistic skills. So to the artistic and creative portion of the class, and also I think the most fun. So once you've got through these first 3 assignments, and the lighting, the depth of field, and the motion, once you've got through with those, then you can have fun with the artistic and creative side, and that's what's exciting about photography. So once you've got those technical skills down, then you learn the artistic skills, and that's when you can start taking really awesome photographs and have a lot of fun with it. So composition is important. Don't forget, rules are made to be broken. But I want you to always remember this, rule of thirds. This is such an easy thing for a good composition, and there's no excuse for you not to be using this, right? Important elements along the lines, and subject matter intersecting with one of those 4. Right? Happy composing. We'll see you in the next lecture.